With over 6 years in development following the multifaceted disaster of the franchise's previous release, 343 Industries abashedly initiated a soft reboot of the series, while ambitiously taking it to treacherous new heights as the ongoing service to define the next decade of Halo. They encouraged the insurmountable promise of the definitive Halo game, with the hopes of the franchise resting on this pivotal installment, and upon its release, relief, as the game garnered strong critical reviews and saw wide appreciation from fans. And yet, over 3 years later, with the property suffering like never before, what is the legacy of Master Chief's latest and most ambitious outing? Is it a triumph for the franchise as was corroborated by reviews, or a misleading and miscalculated misstep that grappled towards nothing but a dead end for the series? This is the story of a game that suffered a disastrous development, from in-house drama to conglomerate politics, that saw its original outline decimated by extensive cuts. This is the story of the rumoured most expensive game of all time, that despite its incongruous name feels ironically limited, repetitive and mediocre. This is the story of the most ironic game of all time. This is the story of Halo Infinite. So, as something of a central thesis, what exactly do I mean by the most ironic game of all time? Well, calling your game Infinite encourages certain expectations from the consumer. The game has to be bigger, more action-packed, with more variety in gameplay, locations, enemies, and storytelling. But the irony of it is that you can only really say Infinite is one of those things, physically bigger. But despite the size of its map, the so-called Infinite Halo game in reality left the franchise on life support, let alone fulfilling its promise to return the series to its glory days, unequivocally failing in what it set out to do in almost every measure. Its evidently intentioned future expansions would never come to be, so 343's decade-long live service strategy was cut short before it even begun, ensuring an ironically fleeting 2-year lifespan for a game incongruously named Infinite. In this video, I aim to give the most thorough account of the game's more than turbulent development through several development detours, TM, while dissecting exactly why this most mediocre of campaigns, in both its gameplay and storytelling, leaves so much to be desired. And I'll be focusing solely on the campaign for now, as while multiplayer is indubitably crucial to the franchise, and Infinite's multiplayer is just as, if not more, laughably finite than the single player, it's the campaigns that have always mattered most to me. And after first completing Infinites that had promised so much, I reluctantly accepted the scathing disappointment that only senseless hype for a conglomerate's cash cow can create. But that unresolved frustration is what's led me to creating this video. And here we are, so here we go. Without any further ado, let's find out the point. Development of Halo Infinite supposedly begun immediately following the release of Halo 5, with 343 presumably planning to stick to the 3-year development cycle that would see the conclusion of their Reclaimer trilogy. But with the less than favourable reception to both of 343's attempts, especially with Halo 5's disastrous campaign setting a new low for the series, it's clear the studio rolled back its immediate development plans to spend some more time to deliberate over the direction of Xbox's flagship franchise. franchise. Others have discussed the problems with Halo 4 and 5 ad nauseum, so I won't go too in depth about why those games failed to stick the landing, but suffice it to say that those titles left 343 in a serious position of pressure pending the release of their next game, with a drastic change of plan needed to keep the property alive and, well, alive. Not that that could lead to over-promising or anything. Jettisoning a franchise plan, if there even was one, can often lead to ugly results, and the writers of Halo Infinite found themselves in the incredibly unenvious position of negotiating a way out of the revolting yet unignorable conclusion Halo 5 offered, while attempting to please disillusioned fans and trying to make sense of a universe that had been irreversibly changed by Cortana's inexplicable turn to evil. Infinite therefore aimed to be a repentant return to Halo's roots, while simultaneously moving the franchise forward in an exciting new direction as the quintessential soft reboot that's revitalized so many properties from the brink of irrelevance. Infinite promised to put right the mistakes of the past, putting the players back in the Master Chief's shoes as they explore a Halo ring for the first time in nearly 15 years, whilst reuniting fans with the beloved look, sound, and feel of Bungie's games. This atoning approach was certainly communicated well in Infinite's 2018 reveal trailer, which showed the different environments of the Halo ring you could explore and the wildlife you might encounter, before showing a redesigned Master Chief returning his armor to its pre-343 glory days. It was a cajoling first impression for the game, but actually succeeding in returning to the glory days Infinite was evoking would be something else entirely, and the aforementioned mounting pressure meant they appeared to be sensibly taking their time, with Infinite receiving the longest dev time of any game in the franchise, just over 6 years, more time than it took from the release of Halo CE in 2001 to the release of Halo 3 in 2007. However, the development of Infinite is largely shrouded in mystery, but the snippets we do know infer a nightmarish and impeding production. And oh boy, the implications of what we do know make this game just infinitely fascinating to me. Like, how can you fuck up the development of every game you've made and still have your latest one, where you should have learned from your mistakes, appear to be the most disastrous of all? Planned to be the most ambitious game in the franchise, ultimately Infinite's calamitous development meant that reportedly 2/3 of the game was cut, and the original vision of a fresh start for the franchise would be left unrealized. Nevertheless, the third we ended up with left us with plenty to scrutinize, assess, enjoy, and despise. So let's conclude our first detour and begin the journey proper. Strap in, folks, this is gonna be a long one. Halo Infinite begins with a bang, as money immediately burns before our eyes thanks to a flashy and undoubtedly expensive pre-rendered cutscene. Starting with the very frame where Halo 5 left off, this cutscene serves to introduce us to the conflict between humanity and the Banished, as well as their leader Atriox, as he batters the Master Chief and leaves him for dead during the destruction of the UNSC Infinity in the fight for Zeta Halo.
My name is Atriox, and I am the last face you will ever see.
Well, at least he's partially right in that Chief certainly won't see his face again for the rest of the campaign.
Atriox, even from beyond this life, your will is served.
But anyhow, I'd assume this epic CGI explosion fest was subsequently added to create a bit of action for the game's introduction. And don't get me wrong, I'd rather include it than have nothing at all. But the immediate impression drawn from this cutscene is that wouldn't it be better if we were actually playing this crucial battle that looms over the entire narrative as the opening mission? Infinite suffers greatly from staging its events so that all of the more interesting, dramatic, and action-packed story beats have already happened before we as the player even take control. It feels like we're playing the aftermath of a more exciting and spectacular Halo campaign by piecing together all the events we missed out on and don't get to play. And speaking of the aftermath of a Halo campaign, it becomes apparent right from this opening shot that the enduring turd of a conclusion that Halo 5 left us is so cripplingly fundamental to the Halo universe that they have no choice but to hurriedly resolve that game's cliffhanger off screen, but still unavoidably have it looming so detrimentally over Infinite no no matter what. And I understand that 343 found themselves stuck so firmly between a rock and a hard place, and they absolutely went in the right direction by moving past the creative or whatever as swiftly as possible. But then I remember that it's 343 that got themselves stuck in this dilemma to begin with, and this game is consequently worsened by their previous mistakes. I'll endeavour to judge Infinite based on its own merits, but 343's incompetence in their decision-making in the decade preceding Infinite and the 3 years preceding it remains such an unfortunate hindrance that it makes it increasingly difficult to discuss the campaign without this context in mind. But either way, Infinite rightly begins a brave new story of its own, and that story truly begins with our introduction to the pilot. I actually like this introductory cutscene a lot. It underscores Infinite's efforts to tell a more human story, and here the pilot is likeable, charming, and relatable, and the actor gives a strong performance.
Please don't die. Please don't die. Yes! 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 We're going home!
For what it's worth, I think this cutscene is a real highlight for the game. This part where Chief is floating in between the ships and the piano kicks in is an excellent tone setter, demonstrating humanity's peril following their defeat to the Banished.
You have one bullet against an entire army. What can you do on your own?
I told you. It's enough.
So I see.
I honestly had such high hopes for the game when they first showed off this cutscene, and my hopes were raised even further once I began the first mission, which I'm also pleased to say is one of the best in the game. So, after Chief touches down on the enemy ship, he tears through its defenses, doing what he does best as we finally take the controls. And upon reaching the bridge, we overload the engines and a daring escape ensues. It's good stuff. It's here that I'll say Infinite's gameplay and presentation are by far the best 343 have produced, and had this been the Halo game that we've been playing for the next 10 years, I'd be more than happy with the solid foundations that are laid down here. It feels fun, it both looks and sounds great. Doesn't this appear to be an excellent start for the game so far? Don't worry, let me fix that for you quickly. Right, so as a complete outlier to the remainder of the game, Warship Gabrakan is essentially the one and only level to feature any kind of dynamic set piece, as you grapple through the Banished ship while it explodes behind you, swinging your way between the falling sections of the vessel. This feels both exciting and dramatic as the opening of the game, and it appears technically impressive, like a next-generation Halo game should. Don't get me wrong, it's nothing 343 haven't done before. In fact, it reminds me a lot of Halo 4's opener, and it's nothing special compared to any number of Bungie missions. But to me, these exciting set pieces are what Halo is all about, and it makes this first mission a bizarre abnormality when compared to everything else that follows it. So why start with a more traditionally designed Halo level if you don't then utilize this format at all for the rest of the game's runtime? But more on that later. We're focusing on story for now, so I suppose it's time to talk about one of its weakest elements.
And everything we know about the Covenant's 1,000-year history. Atriox was the first to defy the Covenant and survive.
The Banished were an intriguing new faction when introduced in Halo Wars 2. The question of how to include the Covenant after Halo 3 has only produced messy answers, as 343 scrambled for excuses as to why you're still fighting these guys after the conclusion of the trilogy, and the Banished have offered the best solution yet. A defected faction of Covenant deserters. The backstory of their rebellion within the Covenant makes them not just the usual 343 moustache twirlers who are one-dimensionally evil, but big monkey men that you can actually relate to yet still fear and be motivated to defeat. You know, like proper villains. They represent the best the Brutes have ever been. So how does Infinite build on the solid foundations laid down in their debut? Well, this guy's basically just gonna shout at you. A lot.
Atriox, hear these words. Even from beyond this life, your will is served.
Your forces occupy the ring. Within hours, it will be under our control. Humanity will cower before your legacy. They will burn. Their brazen defiance will be all but a memory.
His name's Escharum, and being a nuanced villain with characteristics, a backstory, and any kind of agency within the narrative, it's just not really for him. I'm not exaggerating here, but all he does throughout this entire game is call you via hologram to tell the player how ultimately powerful and fearsome he is. And not once does it feel like he actually does anything that affects the plot, or in fact, just anything that doesn't involve monologuing as if he's on stage. How threatening. It's like if in Halo Wars 2, Atriox was introduced via hologram to tell the Spartans he's really scary, I promise. But no, we see him emerge from the shadows and hand the Spartans' asses to them as our first impression of his character. So we know he's a threat, and then we uncover his compelling backstory to boot. But never mind, Atriox is disposed of off-screen, saved for sequels that we'll probably never see, while Escharum spectacularly fails to fill his boots, and the whole game suffers because of it. As for his plan and why he wants the ring, we know very little and will come to discover even less. He says he wants to make the ring operational,
This ring will be operational.
and then supposedly fire it.
The Banished are planning to fire this ring.
But why? We don't know. I'm sure there'll definitely be interesting answers down the line though as things are revealed. It's not like they wouldn't answer such an important aspect of the plot. Plot aside though, in gameplay the Banished are basically just the Covenant again, which is fine. These enemies are as enjoyable to fight and fun to listen to as they have been for over 20 years. So as the main enemy faction in Infinite, they serve their purpose effectively. You just better get used to fighting them. A lot. So next up, after destroying the Banished ship, is the mission Foundation, where we're first introduced to the weapon, an exact copy of Cortana who was deployed by Halsey to shut down Chief's old AI. After making our way through a wrecked Forerunner facility, battling the Banished to get to her first, Chief picks up his new AI companion to help stop the Banished from firing the ring. While being an exact copy, she's a distinct character from the Cortana of old though, appearing more childish and innocuous, which is at points annoying, but I like her character enough and she fills her role well, providing all of the essential exposition, comedic lightheartedness, and contrasting characteristics to Chief appropriate for all of our adventures on Zeta Halo. The performances from Jen Taylor were also very impressive, voicing 3 different characters who are essentially the same person and yet tailoring each one to sound unique and distinctive. These two make a good pair, as did Chief and Cortana before them, and correspondingly this mission features the first of the many flashbacks left behind in data clusters scattered throughout the campaign, where in this case we see their very first meeting before Halo CE.
What do I call her?
Ask her. She named herself.
Hello, Master Chief. I'm Cortana.
Together you become our newfound hope.
I like the use of these flashbacks to fill in the Cortana backstory by actually showing it to us instead of just telling. They do a good job at displaying the special companionship between these two characters, if only other parts of the narrative had followed this structure. Before making our way to the surface of the ring, we come upon our first boss fight of the game. Halo's always struggled with bosses in the past. Bungie tried their hand at them in Halo 2 and they were functionally odd, but sufficient for 2004. So it's fair to argue that Bungie never really found a way to make bosses work within their gameplay infrastructure. 343 then infamously tried their hand at them in Halo 5 with the Warden Eternal, who you have to fight on a ludicrous 6 different occasions across that campaign.
He's dead. Who's next?
That's him dealt with again.
Infinite certainly improves upon these past iterations, but I don't think they're the remarkable highlights of the game 343 seemingly positioned them to be. Where before, we had spectacular encounters with cosmic consequences as the climax of a Halo level, we now just have a modest confrontation with a banished B-lister. At least in Halo 2, the adversaries you fight are built up as serious and engaging villains who earn the right to be taken down in a unique and memorable way. Infinite feels like it for the most part has bosses for the sake of it, like it's the end of a level so it must be boss fight time. They're certainly fun for what they are, but limiting in how these bosses can make an impression upon the player before immediately being slain. Take our first boss fight with Tremonius for example. He's yet another shouty brute who's killed before he has much of a chance to say or do anything. And he's one of the better cases as at least he gets a scene before we take him on. purely treating these guys as simply more powerful versions of standard enemies, as a prominent challenge to freshen up the gameplay at the end of a level, is a reasonable enough argument for their inclusion. But when these early boss fights appear functionally identical to those at the end of the campaign, we do start to have a serious problem. You don't want the main villains of your game to feel like nothing more than extra powerful versions of standard enemies. And when you take out one shouty, characterless brute who feels indistinguishable in both gameplay and personality from a primary villain at the end of the game and he's a one-dimensional pushover, it only helps to extrapolate the player's ambivalence towards this game's antagonists. And speaking of, after another utterly pathetic phone call from Escherum, we are truly welcomed to Zeta Halo for the first time. Fighting some more Banished to win the UNSC back a foothold on the ring, we arrive at another malignant issue with the direction of the game. As we perilously fly across the ring into the very heart of the Banished territory, with the Halo theme playing, alarms blaring, and explosions rocking the Pelican, the pilot says,
Chief, this is insane. I see Banished everywhere. Everywhere.
Oh really, do you? Because I don't. And it was at this point in my first playthrough that alarm bells started very loudly ringing. In my head, not in the Pelican, even if I really didn't want to listen to them. Bafflingly, every single one of Halo Infinite's cutscenes are presented as a single unbroken shot to present the illusion that the game takes place in one continuous take, despite the loading screens, an idea which was evidently ripped from 2018's God of War. This artistic choice was likely made to help focus in on the more personal story, as the camera staying locked to Chief's perspective grounds the audience in his viewpoint and on the emotionally charged exchanges between the game's characters. And that's great and all, and I could appreciate a world where this possibly worked for individual cutscenes, but for a whole Halo game, it's an entirely bizarre decision, which only further delineates Infinite's, well, infinite propensity to tell and not show. And this persistent weakness is first exposed and exemplified best in this constrictive transitional cutscene.
It better be. I'm getting out of here.
Halo has always been a series defined by dramatic, action-packed set pieces both in cutscenes and gameplay, but Infinite impairs its own sense of scale and spectacle by having its cutscenes hide the action in order to stick to this unbefitting Warner concept, so that every cinematic in the game looks nigh on identical and drained of any kind of dynamism or excitement. They even do this thing where the background environments vanish as we're focused so intensely on the subtleties between the game's characters who appear in some kind of void. But as these scenes are predominantly the weapon issuing exposition, it makes them feel even more lifeless, boring, and repetitive. This works effectively only where it tonally belongs, in about 3 key emotional cutscenes, but is otherwise stiflingly constrictive and frustratingly detrimental. It just makes possibly the most expensive game of all time appear cheap in its lack of action and uninspired in its pale imitation of another game's success. Remember when Halo was the franchise setting the trends instead of spinelessly impersonating them? I don't want this to come across like if I don't see an explosion every 5 seconds, my brain switches off. Halo's cutscenes have always had intense and intimate character moments. Some of the best cinematics in the franchise are exactly that.
You know me. When I make a promise,
you keep it. I do know how to pick 'em.
And the strongest cinematics in Infinite are the emotional moments that are allowed to shine because of this style.
How can you trust me?
I don't. But I want to.
So while I do actually like the idea of the more personal story Infinite attempts to tell, crucially, this game's predecessors are also complemented by a level of spectacle that's essential to the chemistry of the franchise. While their cutscenes are certainly more engaging and grandiose, Bungie's games save their most thrilling moments for the player themselves to experience through gameplay, because these games are ultimately rollercoaster experiences in the best way possible. Infinite has plenty of action at the most basic level of the Halo formula, shooting, but as previously mentioned, there are essentially no set-piece moments throughout Infinite outside the first and final levels to provide any kind of variety, excitement, or impression of the bombastic universe-saving stakes that Bungie excelled at, and consequently Infinite's take on the Halo formula is irreparably imbalanced. It's like an Indiana Jones or Star Wars movie without the creative and memorable action scenes, and yet Infinite foolishly forgoes this pivotal piece of its own DNA. And I think this is ultimately why these cutscenes bother me so much. They reflect most of all the critical lack of spectacle and grandeur that epitomizes how, cuts or not, 343 yet again misunderstood the basics of the franchise. From the Covenant attacking your ship to racing across a rapidly decaying ring, the original trilogy ensured that every mission stood out on its own, so that most Halo fans can identify any individual level with a glance and say, oh, that's the level where it becomes a terrifying horror game. That's the level where we have to team up with hunters and a scarab to stop the Halo from firing. Oh, that's the level where you storm the beach, take a warthog for a spin, fly a hornet, commandeer a tank, fight 2 scarabs at once, team up with the Flood to kill the Prophet and stop him from firing the Halo array, and then fight your way back through the Flood to escape. There are genuinely more exciting gameplay moments, more environment showcased and more narrative revelations in this one 30-minute level than in most of the 11 hours it takes to beat Infinite. But it's not just Bungie's games. Even Halo 4 and 5 understood the importance of this most foundational tenet and contain some massively memorable moments of their own. Infinite at least corrects the sins of its predecessor by having something of relative interest happen in the story. And yet I can name far more Halo 5 levels and locations than its supposedly infinite successor. In fact, why don't we play a little game to prove my theory as to why Infinite feels so forgettable in comparison? So can you tell me which level in Infinite this is? Or this? Does this cutscene take place at the beginning, middle, or end of the story?
It matters not.
In which location does this cutscene take place? Could you point to which half of the open world map this is in? Do you start to see my point? But it's not just about locations. 99% of the encounters in the game have no further context to them other than the banished are here waiting in place like stationary targets and Chief needs to go there and kill them. Infinite's core gameplay is so strong, but it begins to mean so little when the reason why you're shooting is just that the enemies are in between you and the next identical cutscene. It's like butter scraped over too much bread. Where are the escapes, ambushes, assaults or holdouts, the large-scale battles, team-ups with unlikely allies, enemy factions fighting each other, the specifically designed vehicle levels, the narrative moments we experience through gameplay, areas that mess with the physics, the flying sections, I could go on. 343 clearly took inspiration from the mission Halo in CE to influence their goals to bring the series back to its roots, but they just made every mission in the game look and play like this level. If Halo CE was 10 straight missions of this, we would not be at the 8th mainline installment of the franchise. 343 just can't help themselves. As soon as they fix one foot by attempting to return to Halo's roots, they go and shoot themselves in the other one. So just like all of the missing content cut from Infinite, I bet the much needed, exciting action that's obscured from us as the Pelican flies through the banished territory must have been pretty cool to see. But crucially, I guess we'll never know it. And speaking of the 2/3 of the game that was cut, what's the reason that Infinite's so lacking in its set pieces and ambitious gameplay? Was there more spectacle in the original version of Infinite before cuts had to be made? Jesus Christ, take a shot every time I say Infinite in this video, and you'll almost be as drunk as I am right now. But anyway, in order to help answer this question, we need to begin our second development detour. Halo 5 had itself suffered a difficult and rushed development, inhibited by aging technology as it utilized a redeveloped version of Bungie's Blam engine refined for the Xbox One. This meant that 343's titles were still built on the now rotting foundations that predate the 21st century.
Halo is the name of this game, and we're going to see, for the first time, Halo.
Consequently, it seems the decision to move to a new engine was made fairly early down the line following the release of 5. As for the last decade, studio heads have debated moving to Epic's Unreal Engine, especially during Infinite's development. However, the fateful decision was made to instead adapt the existing infrastructure into the shiny new Slipspace engine that could inspire the necessary fresh start for both the franchise and the developers themselves that was so sorely needed. Highlighted as a key aspect of the marketing in the 2018 announcement, in which the Slipspace branding was front and center, it was a valid justification for the 3 years of radio silence and a reason to get excited for a game no longer constrained by the infamous technical debt from previous titles.
The Halo engine's a very technical, engineering-focused engine. It's super hard for creatives to work in. We promised the team that we would do the work on the tools and pipeline for Halo 5, so it wasn't such a challenging project to develop, or challenging environment to develop on. And, you know, best laid plans, we didn't do that, and the team, rightfully so, basically called us on it.
But Slipspace's disappearance from later trailers and marketing sadly indicates such ambitions did not come to fruition. And sure enough, it transpires that the new engine was not ready by the time full development needed to kick into gear. As Bonnie Ross also explained, it was like, quote, trying to fly the plane while we're building the plane. And I think that just caused a lot of pain for people. Things just took way longer than they should to get the content into the game and make sure the content is polished. This also wasn't exclusive to the start of development, but a constant thorn in their side throughout it, as even by the infamous 2020 gameplay reveal, many features of the Slipspace engine were not even fully implemented at the pivotal moment when one of the most expensive games of all time and the intended decisive launch title of the Xbox Series X was first shown to a skeptical public. Yikes. It's painfully obvious that at some stage a major U-turn abolished the revolutionary plans for Slipspace, and so ultimately the final result is far closer to what came before than the intended technological freedom for the franchise and its future, and 343 were again stuck with the same aging code that has seemingly cursed Infinite's development from beginning to end. Consequently, the ineptitude of Slipspace's development has to be to blame for a lot of Infinite's issues, as the last thing that you'd want when trying to revamp a buggy engine is to struggle so severely in updating it that you just have to use the old code anyway, and you're now in a worse position than when you started because 3 years have passed and you have nothing to show for it. Because it sounds like the worst thing you'd want to happen is exactly what happened at 343. Those poor developers were likely stuck with more issues than ever as the infamous technical debt of this Halo engine and the in-house toolset Faber ran rampant. Quick fixes intended to serve as short-term solutions, compounded by old developers over 2 decades, ultimately left 343 engineers with increasingly complex problems to fix, so that Infinite's new and improved engine was jokingly referred internally as not having simply tech debt, but tech bankruptcy. Ultimately, such development issues then inevitably harm the player's end experience. For example, you may have wondered why the scarabs are missing from Infinite and 343's portfolio in general. Well, the rumor is that the code to make them work is so broken from the Bungie days. 343 have been incapable of bringing a set piece that I've certainly highlighted already as a pinnacle of the series to their installments. Similarly, analogous engine issues appear to be the reason why the popular multiplayer game modes, Extraction and Assault, and split-screen co-op, also considered a franchise staple, could not be brought to the game despite the multitude of empty promises from 343's leadership.
When we didn't put split screen in with Halo 5, I think it's incredibly painful for the community and for us. You know, I think it erodes trust with the community. For any FPS going out forward, we will always have split screen in going forward.
If the inability to bring these classic, decades-old features to Infinite isn't reflective of the dire state of the technical stability of the game, then I don't know what is. Such technical issues not only tormented existing employees, but crucially encumbered new ones too, whom Infinite seemingly strongly relied on. Jason Schreier reported in 2021 that the workforce at 343 had become particularly unstable, with almost half of the talent at the studio being temporary contract workers who had to come in blind and try to learn an archaic game engine they would have no prior experience with unless they'd worked on Halo before. However, thanks to everyone's profit-first friend Microsoft, these contract workers are restricted to 18-month contracts, so by the time a hard-working new employee can get up to scratch with the fragile and antiquated engine, they're replaced by someone who'll need to start learning it all over again. There's also the similarly substantial issue of outsourcing, for which the same issues seemingly applied, as during development, quote, a significant portion of the game is being outsourced to third-party contractors, and the coordination between the many different companies contributing to Infinite has been rough at best. It's therefore well evidenced that the technical downsides of development were a huge factor in the failure to realize the infinite nature of 343's vision. And then if you add a pandemic into the mix, you have a recipe for devastation, let alone disaster. And that's exactly what did happen, as 2/3 of the game was indeed devastated by cuts. Despite potentially being the most expensive game of all time, it would correlate that such rumors aren't reflected in the final product because a sickening amount of Infinite's budget, resources, and developers were wasted helplessly fighting technical issues that foundationally plagued this game's development. It's no surprise, therefore, that management have since belatedly backpedaled on their blunder and bit the bullet by formally switching to Unreal for future titles, abandoning their capitulating 10-year live service plan fruitlessly built on crumbling foundations of inadequate and antiquated software.
We want to have a team that can do their best creative work within our engine. So it really was taking the time off, and as we announced the Subspace engine last year, it is all to make sure that we're building the platform for the future of Halo. So it was a huge investment, a bigger investment than we've ever done. That engine is, gosh, 18, 19 years old. And so when you think about where we are today,
So with that agonizing context in mind, let's continue onwards towards the middle of the game, where through following a trail of dead Spartan breadcrumbs, we next encounter Chak Lok, another fairly forgettable villain who relishes in how much he's gonna totally destroy you. How original. It's a decent enough level though. I like the lighting in his tower, and at least his voice is adequately menacing.
Welcome to my tower, Master Chief. It is where you will be broken.
Yeah, fair enough. This is starting to get exciting.
Well, don't worry about me. I'll be here, waiting. Alone.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I forgot I wasn't allowed to have fun. So next up on the boss fight conveyor is Bassus, with another serviceable yet entertaining enough encounter. This mining outpost does feature an admittedly excellent looking banished laser though. I love the way it looks after having seared through the ring, and the soundtrack here is particularly exhilarating. So I'm sure you'll have noticed the consistent trends that are emerging here by now. Aesthetics, music, core gameplay, good. Narrative, characters, and gameplay variety, not so good. And the game won't really deviate from that until its end. So I suppose you can at least say it's consistently mediocre, never reaching the heights of its predecessors while never stooping so low as to be unplayable. It's just meh. But anyhow, the next major story mission begins as we venture down into the conservatory, and as we descend into this Forerunner facility, we hear a suitably chilling scream from this installation's monitor at the mercy of a new unknown threat. So who could this be? Well, unfortunately, this serves as the promising yet ultimately worthless introduction to the Harbinger and the Endless, our hilariously bland new antagonists. We're told that they're worse than the Flood.
You and I both know that there are worse things than the Flood within this ring.
Though it's not like we'll witness any kind of evidence for this sweeping statement for ourselves, so I guess we'll just have to take the writer's word for it. But I suppose this deplorable dialogue isn't entirely incorrect, because they are indeed worse than the Flood in countless ways, like in their design, writing, motivations, gameplay, narrative impact, memorability. And did I say that Escharum was one of the game's weakest elements? Because no, the Harbinger and the Endless are so laughably pathetic. But naturally, these embarrassing antagonists have joined forces for reasons never made clear to us after the Banished unleashed the Harbinger from her imprisonment within the ring for some reason. Wasn't their whole thing that they branched off from their Covenant overlords out of a desire to not be controlled and used as cannon fodder for another race's selfish goals, only to immediately sacrifice their independence and followers to serve the very first alien that they dig up on the Halo ring? But whatever. Before meeting the Harbinger, we are familiarized first with the one and only new enemy type in the game, the Skimmers. I assumed they're associated with the Endless, but I tried looking it up and even the Halo wiki itself is not sure if they're even a part of this new faction, so we have no idea how or why they're here, or why they're even fighting us. Great. But surely the Harbinger herself will clarify what the Endless actually are, right? She won't just spout nonsense villain phrases about how awesome and ultimately powerful she is, right? They won't make the same mistake that they've made 3 times in a row already, right?
The Reformation begins.
The Reclamation is about to begin.
So she has a small speech where she talks in riddles, right out of the boring villain cliche textbook, which 343 presumably wrote themselves. And ultimately, we learn nothing about her or the Endless from this woefully banal first impression. Her character is nothing more than a device to communicate a mystery instead of her own thoughts and feelings.
The Forerunner's lies are at an end. I am the Harbinger of the truth. The Endless will be found. They will ascend.
I can make up equally meaningless lines on the spot, guys. Look, the Eternal Ones will awaken, and the Restoration has begun. See, stick around for the payoff to that one at the end of the video. Spoilers, just like with the Endless, there will be no payoff, or any answers for that matter, to this mystery. That'll be $60, please. The next mission has another customary boss fight against another of this ring's monitors, who takes issue with our plan to stop the reformation of the destroyed ring, before we get an admittedly strong moment between Chief and the pilot following their escape, in the mission infamously showcased as our first impression of the game.
Breathe. No! You don't get to tell me what to do. You don't get to tell me anything. Are you even listening?
I count 3 anti-aircraft cannons.
But this AA gun mission is weird. After each of the first 2 guns, Escharum appears to shout down his webcam at you, and the thought of him sitting there twiddling his thumbs waiting for us to take out the second one so he can call us back is so hysterically stupid that it might actually be the one thing I like about him. He threatens us with his Spartan killers, who we instantly and easily dispatch seconds after hearing about them and how terrifying they supposedly are.
My Spartan killers are coming for you.
Oh, scary! Oh, shiver my timbers! Shut up, man!
Right, your Spartan Killers, a group containing 3 members, 2 of which I just immediately eradicated. What was the point? So this mission also contains a major character moment between Chief and the pilot, whose incessant moaning at literally everything we have done up to this point has begun to take its toll, so a character who I liked upon first meeting is now nothing but a source of frustration and despair. Roll it.
What can you do on your own? We can't escape. How do we stand a chance against all this? The banished won already. I'm going to die here. Are you kidding me? Why would we go down there? And what? You think we can stop them on our own? We need help. Not heroics. What is wrong with you? Remind me to never pick up a Spartan. This is a terrible idea. You'll get us all killed. You're messing with me, right? First you say you want me to follow some signal. Then you leave me here waiting. Well, go ahead. It's not like I have anything better to do. Fly Pelican straight into enemy territory. No one will ever notice. Great idea, big guy. Guess what? They noticed. Oh God. It was you, wasn't it? Am I dead already? I must be. This is a punishment, right? Yep, this is death. I'll be safe. Safe? I haven't been safe since I found you. I found you, remember? You were out there on your own, and you'd still be out there if it wasn't for me. We're outgunned, outnumbered. Chief, this is crazy. This is crazy. We gotta get out of here. We've gotta move. When this goes bad, it's on you, Chief. Remember that.
He's fun. I like him.
Siempre hay algo contigo. Déjame en paz, por favor.
His negativity is just relentless, and it's such a shame because they already achieved the hard part by making him likable, only to try their best to go and undo it. Halo's a universe full of silly, quipping, larger-than-life characters, and while I don't dislike the fresh concept of a character that doesn't actually like the Chief, the execution here is so lacking in nuance that his whingy soap opera drama about hating himself and regretting his actions comes across as insipidly one-note. Seriously, try and name me one character trait he possesses beyond being constantly scared and upset. And then we come to this scene. So you're telling me he's on the edge, asking to be left with the rest of the garbage?
I'm worthless.
Only for Chief to kneel down and start telling him how human he is? And then suddenly the pilot decides he's finally okay because Master Chief, the famously emotional and empathetic character, somehow inspires him. Sure.
We all fail. We all make mistakes.
But he hates Chief as far as we're concerned. And Chief has done nothing to this point to suggest he even likes the pilot either.
Immediate extraction. My location.
Oh God. It was you, wasn't it?
Now.
I'm coming.
He's just a taxi to him. So why would Chief's boring Cortana story suddenly inspire him to risk his life? The trailer that introduced us to this character was called Discover Hope. And sure, by the end of this mission, the pilot has discovered hope, but in this cutscene his character is so lost, so broken and so bereft of any positivity that it makes you feel as though there is no hope to discover, which in itself is not the problem. But you can't then just expect the audience to accept that this is abruptly resolved within the space of one cliched conversation. You have to earn that shit. If The Last of Us just had Ellie hating Joel's guts, and then after one conversation she accepts him as her new surrogate dad, why would we care? Consequently, this scene, and by extension this character relationship, is nothing but emotionally ineffective as the disappointing product of a rushed arc with underutilized potential. But hey, on the bright side, at least the pilot will have stopped moaning at us now. Oh wait.
This, on the other hand, mostly feels like a nightmare.
We're then treated to one of only 2 scenes in the whole game where the Harbinger and Escharum both interact, despite inexplicably working together, in a scene where 2 hopelessly written and scantily fleshed out alien monsters embarrassingly over-articulate in a desperate attempt from the animators to convey some sort of energy and emotion. What an embarrassing waste of everyone's time. In fact, this middle section of the game is by far its weakest point, not just narratively, but in terms of gameplay too, as we're presented with 2 missions in a row where you have to tick off identical chores, 3 AA guns and then 4 beacons. This is purely extending the game's runtime, and when the missions are repetitive and you've been non-stop fighting the same 6 or 7 basic enemy types for several hours now, the cracks really begin to show. However, the intended design in place here, in terms of what they want you to discover in between these objectives, is obvious. In fact, I suppose I can't really go any longer without talking about it. So, for my sins, it's time to talk about the open world. The original plan for Infinite, as evidenced by both the reveal trailer and its imprudent name, was to have an expansive, fully open world filled with exotic wildlife and varied environments. This was to be inspired by Breath of the Wild, where players could complete missions and objectives in any order that they pleased. But as we know, that wasn't to be, and what we got instead is much more Halo's take on Far Cry, an aging design philosophy that's a far cry from the cutting-edge open-world games that Infinite initially aimed to compete with. The prospect of being able to explore a Halo ring as one open level is a novel one, and I'm sure 343's original vision may well have provided an intriguingly fresh take on the Halo experience, but to avoid sounding like a broken record, I'll just say their plans obviously didn't come to fruition. No matter where you go on Zeta Halo, you will fight the same enemies in the same context in identical looking locations. The fact that this is an open world with only one real biome speaks for itself, and while they do their best to add what they can to this setting, swamps, caves and mountains etc., it is nowhere near enough to adequately diversify the already repetitive experience. It's clear from concept art that not only was Infinite planned to feature a far larger variety of environments on the ring itself, but also other planets, as the amount of art showing Doizak indicates that the Brute homeworld was supposed to be heavily featured for the first time, but also a return to Reach was part of the plan at some stage. Whether these were intended to appear in place of an open world in a more traditional Halo game, or alongside it as part of the 2/3 cut, they nevertheless would have provided some desperately needed variety in Infinite's visual palette. But the bland open world of Zeta Halo is instead what we got, and as such, every mission and side activity takes place within the same 3 environments: the mission Halo from CE, Forerunner Interior, and Banished Base. Over and over and over again. Shit. You visit all 3 within the first hour, and that's all there is. 3 environments in one of the most expensive games of all time. Bunglers. The mangled engine is also clearly not as adept at actually managing these open world environments. The game looks so much better graphically and stylistically in the interior sections, where they can manually fine-tune the lighting and textures with far greater intricacy. Inversely, the open world can occasionally look far less next-gen, probably inhibited by the 2013 hardware that this game somehow released on. I won't deny, however, that thanks to the dynamic lighting cycle, at its best, Zeta Halo looks absolutely stunning. Looks aside, I mentioned at the start of the video that Infinite can technically boast it's the biggest Halo game based on pure landmass, but much of what's presented here on Zeta Halo consists of samey, vacant liminal spaces between static map markers. This is a Halo ring that we are repeatedly told houses haunting mysteries and is enigmatically unlike the others we've visited, but as far as I'm aware, there are no gameplay secrets that you can uncover in the open world that aren't signposted to you on the map besides audio logs, conversely making this one of the most uninteresting Halo rings we've seen. Having these activities always marked on the map squanders any opportunity to incur a genuine sense of discovery, because the player may decide to look over there in search of a worthwhile secret, but if there's no predetermined marker in place, it'll either contain nothing or more banished, so there's never a reason for bothering to explore. How much fun would it be to stumble upon some decaying Forerunner facility of your own accord, or follow a trail of dead Marines to find some crazy powerful boss that's not just signposted to you on the map?
Confirmed kill on the HVT.
Maybe you could find a traversal challenge for the grapple hook, or a puzzle that you yourself have to solve without just plugging in the weapon. I'd love to visit the wreck of the Infinity or the crashed Guardian that's tantalizingly close, but remains outside the player's reach, as you wouldn't need a map marker to go there because any player would see it on the horizon and want to check it out using their own intuition. But Infinite just doesn't encourage the type of exploration that it was originally inspired by. I just finished playing Outer Wilds, and if Infinite had been designed a bit more like that game, where you can piece together information about what happened to Cortana and the Ring by figuring it out for yourself in any order, with the player being driven by a sense of thrilling discovery, drawing them to what looks interesting in the world in front of them, and then being rewarded for that curiosity by organically learning about the story or world, while also blowing up aliens, goddamn, a man can dream. The enemies you do blow up, however, do nothing to engage with this open world. They never move around to different locations or follow you to continue fighting outside of their strictly predetermined combat areas, and you never catch them doing anything of interest in between encampments. The combat activities you can engage in are entertaining enough thanks to the strength of the gameplay, but they simply serve you more of the same thing you've been doing all game anyway. If there's no story to drive me to check off these activities, why would I spend my time fighting the Banished when I can just progress to the next mission and fight the Banished? Not to mention the activities themselves are of course copy and pasted several times, so after the first couple of hours you've pretty much seen everything the open world has to offer. It's the equivalent of just doing this every time you beat a mission. It's barren, it's boring, and it's bungler. Because ultimately, if exploration is not rewarding in an open world, then seriously, why bother having one? Don't get me wrong, I do like having the open world there despite its frustrating flaws, but upon replaying this game, I partook in the open world activities as intended, but after that, I can't see myself ever playing this side content again. In subsequent playthroughs, I just blissfully beeline straight for the next main mission. In fact, I dare you to try and replay Infinite back to back several times like I had to for this video, and not happily ignore the extraneous open world content. Now this is more of a broader gameplay botheration, but vehicles are also completely undermined now on Zeta Halo, where before they would be a challenge that would force the player to approach combat scenarios in different and often creative ways, they are now tediously easy to board with the grapple. I love the grapple hook, but in previous games hijacking a vehicle felt rewarding because you had to be clever to manipulate the AI and successfully pull the maneuver off, whereas now it's just easier than fighting normally. This feels so unrewarding that I would actually avoid doing it while playing because it just felt like I wasn't engaging in the combat in the way it was intended to be tackled, and would subsequently be missing out on these otherwise excellently designed encounters. Having a tank in Halo is fun because you feel powerful as you blow up vehicles and enemies that would normally be too dangerous to face on foot, but again, bringing a tank to a scenario balanced for a battle rifle is boring. Not to mention that driving these vehicles through the open world is torturous in itself when you try and take one anywhere except the predetermined roads and routes throughout the ring. I'd suspect that it was the onerous focus required to design the open world that meant Infinite was robbed of its previously mentioned indispensable set-piece moments. As where before a specific section could be designed around a memorable moment, now the design is completely open, and while fun, I don't think Infinite quite has the sandbox to engage in these open world activities in much of a diverse or creative way other than just shooting. And the fact that pretty much the only differing way you can dynamically approach a mission by being able to bring Marines was only added at the 11th hour again begs the question, why have an open world if you don't commit to making it interesting? Technical limitations or not, it results in no escapes, no creativity, no stealth approaches, no enemies attacking you, and no dynamic alterations to the world as you progress except there being less banished because they've all been slaughtered, one unmoving map marker at a time. That was something that always made the Covenant a threat, as they are often the ones attacking humanity, and we have to do our best to survive despite being on the back foot. However, in Infinite, every encounter is the Banished waiting in their pre-arranged place on the map, as you have to go to them to tick them off your list of copy and pasted chores. As much as I said earlier that a Breath of the Outer Wild style Halo game could have worked, and with a lot more organisation and time it could well have, the more I write, the more I just think that an open world did not need to be meddled with, and the demanding development time allocated to designing a subpar open world distracts from the Halo game this could have been. Because in the end, 343's rushed, derivative open world excels at nothing, and every aspect has been done better somewhere else. Ultimately, is the open world all bad? No. And did it come from an admirable desire for innovation and creativity? Yes. But is it bland, outdated, unrewarding, and repetitive? Absolutely. But who could possibly be to blame for this misled attempt to redefine the series? Well, we're gonna try and figure that one out, because it's time for another development detour. I'd like to preface this next detour by stating that obviously, the majority of the hard-working employees at 343 are not to blame for the many disappointments of Infinite, and that much of their work here is extremely commendable, but the mismanagement of the franchise by those who have been at the helm for longer than Bungie ever held the rights is instead to blame. And yet despite that, those responsible are people too. So this detour does in no way endorse the sickening abuse that those in positions of visibility at the studio face, but vehemently condemns it. It's abundantly clear that people have suffered genuine trauma and distress from working at 343, and I'll be putting up comments from developers to reflect this and their dissatisfaction with the studio, and you can pause to read them as we go. If they aren't a somber indication of the mismanagement of the studio and the franchise from the horse's mouth, then I don't know what is. The leadership over the game itself saw many detrimental changes throughout development that would have certainly destabilized and unfocused the studio. First, in 2017, Brian Reed, the narrative director of the franchise, left 343. How much of an impact he had on the development of the title is unknown, but he was at least involved in the early planning stage for what was presumably at that point Halo 6. It appears he was possibly replaced by Dan Chozick. The difference in job title makes it unclear, as he led Infinite's narrative experience from 2017, and did see the game through to its launch, a privilege that not all of Infinite's many creative directors could afford. Because 2 years later, in 2019, Tim Longo, the game's creative director, was first reassigned within 343 before leaving just a week later. This was pretty late on in the intended development cycle too, in August 2019, just a year before the originally intended release date, so not exactly the leadership shakeup indicative of a happy development. Clearly, not all was it should be. The press release from Microsoft implied that Tim's role would be taken on by Mary Olsen, an executive producer who would now take charge of the campaign team on Halo Infinite as the lead producer. And yet, just under 2 months later, it was confirmed that Olsen had unfortunately left the company, with fan speculation and concern over the direction of the game, forcing community manager Unishek to make a statement assuring concerned fans that there was no creative dilemma inside the studio and no writing on the walls. This statement does clarify that the two people were in separate roles, so the wording from Microsoft could have certainly helped to make this point clearer. I'm well aware development of this scale is likely managed by a legion of different leaders nonetheless, but having such seemingly tumultuous turnover is hardly a good look for the studio. So good thing that in the aforementioned misconstrued press release to Kotaku, Microsoft confidently reassured fans that the overall creative vision and production of the game remains led by Chris Lee, studio head of Halo Infinite. Which ironically leads us to the next and perhaps highest profile departure from the project. Chris Lee, a Halo veteran from the earliest days of 343, who had risen through the ranks at Microsoft to lead their most celebrated franchise as studio head and game director of Infinite, unceremoniously left the company in October 2020. In an emailed statement, Microsoft stated, "Chris Lee remains a Microsoft employee, and while he has stepped back from Halo Infinite right now, we appreciate all he has done for the project to date." Now, I'm not the most fluent in corporate bullshit, but if I had to take a stab, I'd assume this means something along the lines of, we saw the E3 demo, everyone complained, he allegedly may not have been open to higher-ups about the grim state of the game, we've had to delay the chief launch title for our brand new console, costing us millions on top of the hundreds of millions we've already invested, so yeah, he's taking a step back. Infinite basically was the marketing of the Series X, so the development failures didn't only impact the franchise, but the entire Xbox brand at an incredibly essential moment at the start of a new generation, where so much was on the line, so surely Microsoft executives will have been out for blood. Again, I'm not definitively saying this wasn't Chris's own decision, but you don't need me to explain to you why a studio losing its head, both figuratively and literally, just a year before launch and mere weeks preceding the original release date is both suspicious and severely damaging to the project. To replace Lee following the delay would be Bungie legend Joe Staten, but with only an extra 12 months until the revised release date intended for polish and improved technical stability, the impact he would have had on the game's overall narrative and general design will have been mostly negligible. It was too little, too late, and he would then leave the franchise again in January 23, following the crushing layoffs implemented by Microsoft. A lack of strong leadership has long been a weakness of 343's existence, and a well-documented one at that. For example, a suitably unbelievable quote that I can't quite believe exists comes from Frank O'Connor, franchise creative director for Halo, who stated it's kind of like porn, on identifying the opportunities that ultimately make sense for Halo. You know it when you see it. Perhaps the regrettably raunchy impetus behind 343's major decision-making also influenced the development of the offensively terrible Halo TV show, which one insider revealed to be a demanding distraction for the higher-ups at 343. The show had itself suffered a decade-long development hell, and similarly turned out to be an insultingly misguided mess. Because I don't know about you, Frank, but I did not need to see Master Cheeks. I do think it's important to state here that I'm purely reporting the already published comings and goings at the company to benefit our understanding of how the supposed most expensive game of all time ironically turned out the way it did. Just because these people are the leadership doesn't mean they're not human beings. And why they left a job isn't necessarily for us to speculate over beyond the hard evidence we already possess. But as with any piece of art, the artists behind it require studying and scrutinizing. In fairness, not all of these high-profile departures may have dramatically affected the project. It seems the game was more designed by committee anyway, which itself is part of the problem. And it was in development for over 6 years, so of course not every person is obligated to stay at 343 for the duration. But a title lacking driven and focused leadership with a strong creative vision throughout only leads to disappointing and unconvincing results. And the conspicuously high turnover of Infinite's creative leads seemingly led to exactly that. Perhaps the writing was indeed on the walls. With Infinite, you can absolutely feel the turmoil and lack of direction emanating through the screen while playing. Maybe as a result of these comings and goings, or despite them, a clear focus over what the game was even going to be was an essential prerequisite 343's leaders failed to fulfill during Infinite's development. In Schreier's words, Halo Infinite's creative direction was also in flux until unusually late in its development. Several developers described 343 as a company split into fiefdoms, with every team jockeying for resources and making conflicting decisions. One such developer even described it as 4 to 5 games being developed simultaneously. From numerous different planets to a vast open world to an Overwatch-style hero shooter, yes, seriously. The myriad of technical complications, high turnover of staff at all levels, infighting and unavoidable scope creep during development ultimately came to a head in summer 2019 with the game in crisis mode, whereas we are unfortunately well aware 2/3 of the entire planned game was cut. Experimentation followed by cutting is of course a natural part of the development process, but at this singularly devastating point, the game was left lacking such a sense of direction that managers had to instruct some designers to come into the office and do nothing while the studio figured out the next move. What a colossal shit show. So with just over a year until the original launch date, 343 had to cut their losses and attempt to cobble together a game from the carcass of a far more ambitious yet unrealizable title. I mean, it worked once before, but then the pandemic hit. And then the gameplay reveal hit, which was worse, I'll let you decide. It was only after the backlash to the lackluster graphics and presentation that Xbox and Microsoft finally saw fit to delay the game, and the release was postponed to an unspecified date, crippling the launch of their new console. But I hold no sympathy for Microsoft, because plenty of blame for the downfall of Halo should assuredly rest at their feet, rather than those at 343 executing their evil bidding, as their greed and negligence has consistently undermined an evidently talented yet deeply flawed studio. In fact, their remarkable destruction of the Xbox brand in general over the last 2 generations has irrefutably hurt Halo, as they mutilate a once efficacious console manufacturer with countless innovative system sellers into a soulless subscription service. But I'm getting sidetracked. Once Infinite's multiplayer live service was eventually deemed a failure, 343's management were unable to survive their 3rd successive failure to reignite Halo.
I think it must be damp.
And the leadership relationship was at last restructured, with the remorseless Microsoft also gutting a significant portion of perhaps the planet's most depressing studio. If the positive reviews for the game were good for one thing, it's that I hope these poor lower-level developers got a decent bonus for that result, as the turmoil they had to endure means they will have certainly earned it, yet instead their reward was likely getting fired. I can't imagine the agony 343 staff experienced during the disastrous development of this game from top to bottom, and ultimately each and every person who worked on it should be extremely proud of what they managed to achieve through hard work, dedication and resilience against the odds, for a game let down by a lack of a creative vision, sensible guidance to oversee the project, and a cruel conglomerate motivated by nothing but ceaseless profits that their own gluttonous practices continue to hinder. Rant over. So where were we? So, after the soporific second act, the game begins to prick my interest again with the next few missions, because things start to actually happen again. And we're blessed with some rare gameplay variety as we come up against Sentinels instead of Banished, though they unfortunately aren't anywhere near as fun to fight. So after slogging our way through hundreds of them, as our heroes endeavour to stop the Reformation, Chief attempts to delete his new AI out of fear of repeating his failure to stop Cortana. This is supposed to serve as the low point in the narrative to facilitate the triumph of the ending, but yet again, this is emotionally unearned and narratively ineffectual. The weapon is only upset for about 15 minutes, which could have cultivated an intriguing dynamic, but nothing really comes of this supposed strain on their relationship. She just says a few snarky lines to denote her annoyance at Chief's attempts to murder her, but that's all. First time round, I really thought they would play with the player's expectations of these terminals, where we've become so used to scanning them that 343 could turn this on its head so that when Chief reaches out his hand, nothing happens and the weapon would refuse to open a door or something, forcing Chief to have to find a way through on his own. This would positively exploit a repetitive weakness of the game to align the player to the characters whose drama would consequently be expounded upon through gameplay, demonstrating to both Chief and the player the importance of the weapon to him personally and in stopping the enemy. But alas, no luck, and we're offered a couple of lines where the weapon just tells us she's mad until she's not anymore. But what eventually stops her from being angry at Chief, I hear you ask? Well, only the stupidest plot twist of all time, because it turns out the new Cortana is actually a copy of Cortana. What a twist! Did a single person playing not already blatantly know this? Well, if anyone didn't realise, thank God we get a needlessly excessive montage of them both clicking to prove they must be alike. Do they think we're idiots? This entire plot point doesn't make any sense anyway. They have to invent a way for the weapon to be annoyed at Chief to expedite some drama, but if she discerns the obvious that she's a Cortana clone, she would understand why Chief wanted to delete her, and there'd be no hostility between our heroes. When she does finally find out, she immediately offers to let Chief delete her anyway. The audience already knows what the resolution is before they even start arguing. Every character knows what it is except the weapon.
Cortana, but she... This is all her fault.
So this imbalance of plot information just stifles the already predictable drama. Chief even possesses vital narrative information the player doesn't, for I think the first time in the series. And so we are intended to be emotionally aligned with the weapon in this scene, and not the character we actually play as. Like this is supposed to be as much of an astounding shock to us as it is to her. All of a sudden the relationship between what the player's feeling and what the player's in-game surrogates are feeling is way out of whack. And resultantly, the moment intended to be the third act turnaround as the characters see the light through the darkness just falls flat. The other sequence intended to amplify the drama is when the pilot is kidnapped by the elite Spartan killer. Maybe had the pilot progressed to achieve some brave feat of heroics following his conversation with Chief that exhibited a development in his character in any feasible way, or just honestly done anything, we'd care. But he acts the exact same way before and after this supposed turning point in his quote-unquote arc. We even see him being taken before Escharum, where we now have a main character face to face with the primary antagonist, and he says nothing. This scene presents the impeccable opportunity for the pilot to again please show how he's developed as a character. Have him stand up to Escharum and say something brave or defiant. He could anger the brute by telling him he's being undermined by the Harbinger, or kindly inform him that Chief is going to murder him and teabag his corpse. Because he's gone from being a despairing coward to discovering the hope and belief that only the Master Chief can provide, and he trusts his new friends to save him. I actually think it would only take one line to demonstrate some developed charisma or courageousness here that would make us want to rescue him, but instead he inexplicably says nothing, and I personally couldn't care less about his capture. But rescue him we shall. And I'll also use this opportunity to take a break from the rather depressing onslaught of negativity and praise some of the positive aspects of the game I haven't found time to reference yet, as these final 3 missions are without doubt the strongest in the game, gameplay-wise at least. So I've repeatedly mentioned that Infinite's core gameplay is great, and I stand by that. The inclusion of the grapple hook, despite the problems it causes, is just too much fun. I especially like how it ties into combat and isn't solely used for traversal. Whether you grapple a weapon towards you or stagger a jackal to bypass its shield, they really went all out here and it's wonderful. Being able to throw fusion coils also never gets old, and most of the new weapons in the game are fun. I especially enjoy the new hardlight ones. Infinite Sandbox is excellently fine-tuned and a triumphant return to that good old-fashioned Halo feel. Although I think the fact that the multiplayer released first slightly hurt my experience, because when playing the campaign there weren't any new sandbox elements to discover, as I'd already extensively used everything online. But still, I never tire of when this happens, or when it goes like this, and when you can do one of these. Furthermore, the enemy AI is dynamic and catches you off guard on the higher difficulties, as they intelligently flank and pressure you. While the distinctive types and ranks of enemies within the Banished are brilliant and do just enough to stop me from going insane while fighting them over and over. All they needed to do was double it for another faction as well and we'd be golden. But ultimately, these are all aspects that I think have positively added to the franchise and should become gameplay staples for the series moving forwards. A very impressive feat that I don't think 343 accomplished with their previous titles, and consequently cannot go without well-earned praise. And speaking of their previous titles, I also have to mention that the art style is orders of magnitude better than Halo 4 and 5, making Infinite successfully look like Halo again, while also nailing the music, sound, and feel. Oh, and these are some of my favourites from the soundtrack as well, by the way. The fact there's so many being a true testament to the quality of the score. So despite the game's infuriating shortcomings, there's still a lot to enjoy here. Right, enough bloody positivity. We've got to rescue the pilot as we partake in the only true vehicle mission in the game, which is a fun if limited tank excursion through a linear path towards Escherum's base. I always enjoy battling through the exceedingly well-designed Banished training facility inside, where they've studied humanity in order to learn their every move. But Escharum immediately pisses me off again by only now mentioning crucial plot information that he had no reason to not disclose earlier before it was revealed to the player in the previous mission.
The false god, Cortana, destroyed my world, my home.
At least the boss fight here with the Elite is one of the game's best, despite the fact we've effectively already played it at the start of the game. But I like how atmospheric and creepy the arena is, and on Legendary it's genuinely really nerve-wracking knowing he can just spring out of nowhere to kill you. Though unfortunately, the next one won't come remotely close to those standards. The confrontation with Escharum is fine on paper, yet potentially ranks as my least favourite fight of the game, purely because of how it was constantly built up and glorified throughout the story to a comical degree.
True test of legend.
Only for our very first meeting with him in person to be an anticlimactic and familiar feeling cat and mouse style boss fight. He appears throughout this mission over the phone to spout his usual garbage dialogue, waffling about how epically he's going to kill Chief, because all this character is capable of is telling you things without actually doing anything himself. And while he was monotonously jabbering on for what felt like the 100th time, I realised you can just stand behind his hologram to completely undermine any sense of tension that 343 intended. Not that there really was any to begin with. Once you do finally get to be in the same room as him for the first time, you unremarkably dispatch him, and we then bear witness to another wildly baffling cutscene. After dishonoring his very dead corpse, Escharum miraculously appears upright, to fall into Chief's arms to die in his embrace like a lover.
What is happening?
So Chief can out of nowhere empathize with a fellow soldier because he was apparently
hoping he'd done the right thing. Questioning his choices.
But I don't know, he seemed pretty ecstatic about his choice to kidnap and torture your friend and try to murder you one-on-one. He was so certain he'd done the right thing, in fact, he spent the last hour bragging about it. What are you talking about? It's an absurdly pathetic attempt to try and add depth to their astonishingly shallow antagonist. And it's also at this point that I realised Escharum does literally not leave this little room throughout the entirety of the campaign. He just sits here waiting to call you and then dies here the first time he actually meets you. Not once does he even get any fresh air. What a great villain, guys. A real all-timer. To top it off, this terrible cutscene concludes in the most awkward and confusing fashion, as the pilot cracks a joke that, despite my best efforts, I genuinely cannot comprehend.
I have one question before we leave.
What is it?
Has anyone seen a pelican? What?
Like, that's not funny. And then we're in the Pelican in the next scene. Like, what am I missing here? Please do let me know if I'm just being dense. As for the rest of the Banished, by the time their leader's killed, I still don't know what they want or why they're doing anything. Earlier on, the pilot guessed uncorroborated that they might want to rebuild the ring to go home.
The Harbinger and the Banished shared the same goal.
Rebuild the ring.
But why?
Maybe they want to go home too.
And this might make sense if we didn't then discover that their home got death-starred. Forced to use my own imagination because the game evidently lacks one, I'd speculate, unsubstantiated, that they want to maintain control of the rebuilt ring because it A, makes them powerfuler, and B, provides them a new home. But such basic motivations are never expressed, and besides, why on earth would they want to activate the ring and be killed by it? Remember this?
The Banished are planning to fire this ring.
You realize they don't believe in the great journey and know they'll just die for no reason, right? Perhaps Chief in his old age just confuses them with the Covenant of old. And honestly, who can even blame him? The characteristics that once made the Banished unique are all stripped away in Infinite, in favour of a redolent retrograding of the Covenant without the fascinating characters, hierarchies and goals that made them such compelling villains to begin with. I guess the only tangible goal of the Banished in this game is to provide cannon fodder to assist in the maddeningly vague concept of freeing the Endless. Yet we don't know why they're even interested in doing so. Conceivably, small tweaks could have shown the Harbinger to be manipulating and exploiting a desperate race that had just lost their planet and their leader, with a scared Escharum genuinely believing he's doing what's best for his people, but ending up dying because of it, making you understand and empathize with the Banished to a far greater degree, like in Halo Wars 2. But you can't just tell me he was questioning his choices and expect me to empathize while having already shown me the uninteresting and insipid opposite. It's a complete waste of a natural successor to the Covenant, because with no discernible aims, purpose, or captivating characters, the Banished are entirely pointless and inconsequential to the narrative. Seriously, if you took Chief scrapping them out the script, what impact are you left with? It's utterly embarrassing. And yet, after all that, the very worst is still yet to come. I've fleetingly referred to the Harbinger throughout this video so far, but I've barely had to bring her up because she so rarely appears or impacts the narrative in any meaningful fashion until the very end. But even at the death, the game inexplicably refuses to elaborate on who she or the Endless even are. All we're told is that she aims to release her people, but as discussed, we're given no context as to what this entails or why it even requires preventing. The very first thing the Harbinger says to us is,
"We are not enemies."
And yet we're forced to treat her as such without any cause or understanding. She implies that they were wronged by the Forerunners in some way and were imprisoned because of it. So why is it so bad if they're freed? Chief even states he doesn't actually know what her plan is.
The Harbinger's at the auditorium. Whatever she's planning,
It's worse. I get it.
Yeah, but why? I presume he wants to stop the reconstruction of the ring so it can't be used because that's kind of his thing. And I guess the reconstruction is for some reason integral to Harbinger's scheme to free her friends. But is that really all there is to this climax? A circumstantial conflict of interest? How exciting! During my first playthrough, I was understandably expecting the Endless to be a new enemy faction that 343 had left as a surprise for us to discover and fight. I guess they are touted as the universe's next major threat because we're told that they're worse than the Flood in some nondescript way. So I was logically anticipating meeting them in-game to pay off this abundant setup. But would you believe it? We complete the campaign without so much as a glimpse at the Endless themselves beyond our poorly fleshed out friend here. Have the goals of Halo's best villains not always been straightforward and understandable for the player to then prevent? Stop the Covenant from firing the rings and stop the Flood consuming the universe. Simple concepts, but they show us why the stakes are high and why to be invested. The twist of the Flood in Combat Evolved not only provided a fresh challenge and change of tactics in gameplay, but they were built up as a serious universal threat that the game's second half revolves around. So that when you eventually stop them, it's rewarding because the player understands the peril they're preventing because they've seen why they're a danger firsthand, in both cutscenes and in gameplay, rather than only being told what to think and feel. Imagine a Halo CE where we only hear about the Floods and how scary they are, without ever seeing them before defeating the Gravemind in a pathetic boss battle after he's appeared in only 3 cutscenes before it. Why should we care about averting the return of the Endless when we don't know who or what they are, while never meeting any of them except the Harbinger, who epitomizes this frustration in all of her obfuscating obscurity? I just can't believe they managed to fail in establishing the literal basics of an antagonist, and not just once but twice. But then I guess it's fool me twice if you include the preceding games. Either the Endless originally had a far more expansive role before the ruinous cuts, or maybe 343 was so consumed by their 10-year plan that they forgot to tell us anything in the base game, presumptive that answers would swiftly come in future DLCs or Destiny-esque expansions, which is now more than a little awkward. The countless audio logs you can find that talk about the Endless are also frustratingly vague and nebulous, which would be fine if we eventually got conclusive answers to the admittedly interesting questions they present, but as we don't, every single one of these steaming logs just boils down to the monitor saying, "Ooh, the Endless are mysterious, aren't they?" without the slightest payoff needed to make it mean anything. This kind of ambiguous, empty dialogue drives me up the wall, and it doesn't just apply to the extraneous audio logs, but literally every other piece of dialogue concerning them, ensuring the entire Endless enigma is wholly superficial and completely redundant within the Halo universe. Believe it or not, I was pathetic enough to tally up every single line of dialogue featured in the main missions that specifically revolves around or directly mentions the Endless, seeing as this is where the game should educate us all about them, so that we understand what we're up against. You know, the most basic of basics. It totals around 40 lines, and from all of that information, all that writing, we know 3 things, all of which are revealed in the very first cutscene with the Harbinger. The remaining dialogue is pretty much just variations of the Harbinger repeating,
"The Endless will return,"
and other characters constantly countering with,
"The Endless can never return."
How insightful. And on an unrelated note, why was it so easy for the Banished to free the Harbinger in the first place if the Endless are such a threat? As their assumed leader, shouldn't she be locked even further away than the rest of her people? Or at least not randomly on her own? The Restoration wasn't required to free her. She's clearly unique or important in some indefinite way, but we don't get to be privy as to why her character could possibly be of any interest or individuality. But whatever, who even cares? Before we know it, we defeat her in an utterly lackluster and unexciting boss fight.
You...
This concluding contest being the only one I found to feel pretty unfair on Legendary, as I died again and again to attacks I could not respond to. I only beat it on the hardest difficulty because they hand you plenty of checkpoints throughout, so I essentially brute forced my way through it, seemingly surviving more by luck than by strategizing and studying her different attacks and patterns, culminating in an attritional slog of a final fight. And it's a crying shame that an otherwise excellently designed title ends so atypically in the gameplay department. To summarize, it's obvious to me that whatever the case, through cuts or just sheer incompetence for the third time running, both of these appalling villains provide extremely little of interest, and everything about them is just downright wrong. As for the factions they represent, while the Banished at least give you fun enemies to shoot at, the Endless can't even manage that. So in the end, the Infinite Halo game was incapable of constructing a single competent antagonist. But is that partially because this is not how the tertiary chapter of the Reclaimer saga was initially intended to play out, as these two bunglers are not the only failed 343 antagonists Infinite has to deal with. It's time to talk about the true instigator of this game's mess of a narrative, who irreversibly impaired the story from the start. It's at last time to talk about Cortana. And doing so won't be easy. I have a lot of mixed feelings about the Chief Cortana weapon storyline in Infinite, because on the one hand, it's probably the highlight of the game's narrative, which isn't a crazy compliment, but on the other, it's a retroactive level of reactionary backtracking that I struggle to justify. And that's not entirely Infinite's fault, but as I said from the outset, Halo 5 so irreparably impairs the game because how we got here made so little sense and was so poorly executed, it will intrinsically undermine anything Infinite attempts to do to retrospectively save this bewildering trilogy. Contemplating this context, what we get here is actually not that bad. As we progress, it's revealed to us that Cortana had an abrupt change of heart after being locked down by the weapon and subsequently confronted by Atriox, giving up her genocidal ways on the spot, I guess, to sacrifice herself to stop the Banished using the ring. From the grave, she leaves behind the aforementioned data clusters showing the story of her redemption and of her relationship with John. I like a lot of these scenes, especially the repeated use of the motif,
If you knew how you were going to die, how would you live your life differently?
that provides a suitable enough reason for her change of heart. Her conciliatory actions do not fully redeem her as far as I'm concerned though. She destroyed the brute homeworld and for some reason Sydney, unlucky Aussies, but she's only sorry once she's been caught. Regardless, there are some effective emotional moments throughout, and her final message to Chief and the weapon, which she only had a few milliseconds to create, is as good of a send-off to the shambles that was her villain arc as we could have possibly hoped for.
It's just another echo. She's right, John. Just another echo. Sorry, I'm messing with you. I just had a feeling that's what she would say.
Oh, no way! That was actually a clever little line that messes with the player's head for a second while reaffirming character. And you know what? This is a well-written farewell scene throughout.
Perfectly suited, perfectly matched, perfect.
Oops, bit of a shame that dud of a line still slipped through the cracks there, though. But I do also like the use of the callback to Halo 4 to kick the goodbye off with. It's cheap and a reminder of a far more competently told, character-based story, but it fits.
It's okay. You'll figure something out.
Of course I will. They'll pair you with another AI. Maybe even another Cortana model if Halsey lets them. It won't be me. But you know that, right?
Halo 4's story was botched in its own right, but its clear sense of purpose in portraying Cortana's rampancy carries it through with a heart that Infinite just sadly lacks to me.
And for me, it was really important that we tell this story because this was the human heart of Halo 4's campaign. And on a personal note, at the beginning of Halo 4, my mother was diagnosed with dementia. And, over the course of the production of the game, I watched her deteriorate as a human being and become someone that I couldn't even recognize. And, that was really hard, but it was also an inspiration to me to want to tell Cortana's story.
I felt things in Halo 4, yet Infinite isn't heartbreaking or triumphant, exhilarating or melancholy. I don't know what it's trying to say besides just predictably going through the motions to repair prior mistakes. To reiterate my earlier frustrations, Infinite forgoes the traditions of a series epic in scale and spectacle, and prioritizes these forced character-motivated moments, and they're fine. But their lack of complexity, predictability, repetitiveness, absence of interesting character dynamics, and eventual rushed resolutions mean they don't really pack enough of a punch to resonate with me in any meaningful way. I do find it amusing, however, the 343 have failed to properly see through a single one of their villain storylines as originally intended. It's all set up and somehow no payoff. From the Didact to the Harbinger, Space Dictator Cortana is the only one to receive any kind of arbitrary conclusion, and it happens as a flashback entirely irrespective of the player and Chief's actions. But with that, the status quo is accordingly resumed, as the weapon can now take the place of the old Cortana and even use her name for all the future Halo adventures we might now never see. I still don't think the weapon is as strong a character as Cortana in the original trilogy. Yeah, original game's better than 343's, water is wet. But still, I'm happy she's here for whatever the hell comes next. But this is where the story abruptly ends for now, as we've reached the premature conclusion to the promise of an infinite Halo game. To say it ends with an unsatisfying whimper is an understatement. I was so ready for a Warthog run or escape sequence as the silent auditorium collapses behind us, but instead we're anticlimactically teleported out for some more futile setup with an admittedly intriguing time travel teaser. And these missed opportunities are one of the most disappointing things about Infinite, that despite its egregious flaws, it tried to lay the foundation for an exciting tenure of Halo storytelling that could have run with the blank canvas laid down now the repugnant residue of 5 had been fully dispelled. For all its flaws, there is potential here. If they had continued the story, they forgot to pay any of it off in the actual game, but there's interesting questions presented all the same that could have led to some exciting expansions. I understand completely why they cut their losses and opted for a fresh start, but it just makes this story feel like a complete waste of everybody's time. With the narrative not even remotely concluded, Infinite is nothing more than the prologue to a cancelled live service we'll never get to see. The next mainline Halo game will now have to walk the same tightrope as Infinite, as it struggles to distance itself from this game and to tell a story of its own while being irreparably encumbered by the unanswered loose threads of its failed predecessor. And so that's where Infinite leaves us, in the unknown, more uncertain, confused, and disconsolate than ever before. They promised us it would be a game with infinite potential, but it's not enough to only have potential. You have to know what to do with that promise, and it's a promise that Microsoft and 343 Industries ironically failed to keep. So, to conclude, Halo Infinite makes me sad. It's a project that was supposed to accomplish so much in returning Halo to its glory days, and unequivocally failed to do so. But despite my moaning, I'd like to emphasize that so much of what was accomplished here by 343 is their best work as a studio, and an admirable, praiseworthy effort amongst the dreadful development circumstances we've now come to understand. The excellent music, radically improved art style, punchy sound design, well-executed performances, and enjoyable gameplay are all well worth commending, because at the end of the day, this is a fun game, and not one that I feel I've wasted my time in. But many of the hard-working employees that actually achieved this would then be punished for circumstances out of their control by losing their jobs, making them victims of poor decisions that many of them would have had no say in, because it's these consistent, inexcusable mistakes that drag the game down to a place no piece of art wants to be, bogged down by feelings of apathy, disappointment, and frustration, to the extent it eventually becomes irrelevant and forgotten. Ultimately, I question if Infinite achieved anything that it boldly set out to accomplish. Puzzling decisions, repetitive design, duplicated locations, disgraceful villains, a lack of noteworthy spectacle, unfavourable characters, and no real conclusion to its story make this game anything but Infinite, and instead a restrictive, frustrating, and unsatisfying experience. Nevertheless, I didn't make this video solely to moan about these many shortcomings, but because of my infuriation over the game Infinite could have and vitally should have been for the well-being of a property so dear to many of our hearts. I can see the promising vision they had, and they were so close yet so unbelievably far, because every exciting step forward this studio has ever made inherently comes with 2 depressing steps back. Ultimately, Microsoft and 343 Industries have over 15 years buried the Halo franchise through their incompetence, greed, and mismanagement, leaving it in a state worse than it's ever been before. Despite calls from fans, 343, now shrewdly rebranded as Halo Studios, have maintained the mantle of the sole studio in charge of the series, and I would not be surprised to see defining lessons learned from Infinite reflected in their next game. Whether it's a CE remake, a spin-off, or a continuation of this story, I'd expect it to be entirely unlike Infinite in its scale and scope, with a reprioritization of what's needed to make the series a success. And that's the legacy that Infinite will leave the successor it was never intended to have. It's a game that needed to be a turning point, but failed to deliver in almost every measure. That promised a glistening future for the franchise by taking us on a great live service journey through the next 10 years of updates we'll now never get to see. It unsuccessfully attempted to reinvent while ineffectively sticking to its roots, fundamentally suffering from an absence of confident direction and vision. It offers simultaneously the smallest and largest scale Halo experience in its insurmountable guarantee of infinity, while failing to satisfy in either measure due to a chronic lack of memorable spectacle and a weak, prosaic, dead-end narrative. It consequently becomes not infinite as it was discordantly named, but laughably finite. And as such it is to me, without any doubt, the most ironic game of all time. Thank you so much for watching.